This man called police after each time he committed a crime, crying on the phone. This is the story of Minnesota's weepy voice. Between 1980 and 1982, a terrifying pattern emerged in the Minneapolis-St. Paul part of Minnesota. Women were discovered in isolated places, brutally attacked or unalived. Then came phone calls to the local police station from a voice that begged, quote,
"Will you find me? I can't stop."
Let's start at the beginning. On New Year's Eve in 1980, 20-year-old Karen Potek was savagely and left near a factory. She had suffered brain damage, but miraculously she survived. And hours later, police received a 911 call from someone in tears saying, quote,
"There's a girl hurt."
Then, 6 months later, in June of 1981, 18-year-old Kimberly Compton was 61 times. Then again, a call came into the police station from that same weepy voice saying, quote,
"Goddamn, will you find me? I just somebody with an ice pick. I can't stop myself."
Days later, he called again to say sorry and to correct the news reports. This man was tracking his own headlines and calling the police to tell them which parts of the story were right and which were reported incorrectly. A year later, around mid-1982, a woman named Kathleen Greening was found in her bathtub, but there was no phone call to the police after they discovered her body. At least none that the public heard about. Then, just a few months after Kathleen's body was found, in August of 1982, 40-year-old nurse Barbara Simmons was brutally over 100 times, and she was found by the Mississippi River. The called police again, saying, quote,
"Please don't talk, just listen. I'm sorry I killed that girl. I stabbed her 40 times.
Which was way under the 100 that officials found on her body. And by this point, he was known as the Weepy Voice. But the problem was, how do you catch someone who calls anonymously and then disappears before help arrives? For the last time, on August 21st, 1982, he attacked a woman named Denise Williams. She survived her attack and struck her attacker with a glass bottle, making him bleed. So he fled the scene bleeding and called 911 for help. And the dispatchers recognized his voice right away. They knew they had the Weepy Voice on the phone. His name was Paul Michael Stephanie, a 37-year-old hospital janitor. When questioned, he denied everything, until detectives played the recordings of the weepy-voiced calls. And even witnesses from past attacks confirmed that yes, this was the man that attacked them, this was the weepy-voiced. In 1983, Paul was found guilty of unaliving Barbara Simmons and attacking Denise Williams. He was given 40 years for the unaliving and 18 years for the attempted unaliving. I know what you're thinking. He was only convicted for hurting 2 women when our story had 5. Well, while rotting in prison, he was diagnosed with terminal skin cancer, and he confessed to everything. He admitted to the 3 unalivings and 2 violent assaults, which included the confession of Kathleen Greening's. He tied points together that police couldn't, and he finally owned up to all of his actions. He said there was a voice in his head that told him, quote,
"Oh, Paul, it's time to..."
He felt guilty after each attack. He said, quote, "I'm sick and I'm sorry, if sorry means anything after 15 years. He did pass away in prison in June of 1988, just 5 years after starting his sentence, after he was convicted at the age of 53. This case set a precedent for how police handled phone calls from then on. Police upgraded call logging systems, started tracking voice analysis programs, and launched awareness campaigns to teach people when to speak up about suspicious behavior. If you made it to the end of this video, thank you so much for spending time with me, and thank you for listening to this chilling story. I'd love to know your thoughts about this case in the comments. If you have any cases that you want me to cover in the future, please leave those in the comments as well. I read all of your comments. I post true crime videos every day, so if you like that kind of content, follow along so you don't miss the next video. And please stay safe out there. You never know what's around the corner.
So this guy used to be a taxi driver in the 90s, and he says this is a true story. Let me show you my earrings, because then y'all gonna be mad. I was born in the 90s. I'm turning 35 this year. That number is getting serious. So this guy says that when he used to be a taxi driver, he would arrive back home around 2 or 3 in the morning. So on this particular night, he got home around 1 in the morning and noticed that his neighbor was having like a prayer group in her house. When he got out of his car, he noticed that the neighbor's door was open and he can hear everybody praying inside. He did think it was weird because he didn't think anybody would have like prayer groups around that time. So as he's seeing these people praying, there's some people outside as well. He notices the owner of the house, which is his neighbor, coming out and going straight to him. When he looks at her, he notices that she's really scared and worried, and he had never seen that kind of expression from her face before. When she finally gets to him, she asks him if he could do her a favor and take her back to her hometown. This town that she wanted him to take her to was like an hour away, and he almost told her no because he was really tired from working all night, but because he saw that worried look in her face, he was like, okay, get in, I'll take you. So as they're driving, he turns to her and he's like, hey, what was going on in your house? And he says that she just looks up at him and shrugs her shoulders, saying that she doesn't know. Even though she claimed that she didn't know, he knew that it was something urgent, something bad, because of the way that she was looking at him when she asked for the ride. So around that time that they were driving, the weather completely changed and it was really, really cold. They were both really cold in the car, and he decided to turn the heat on. Minutes later, the temperature in the car got back to normal. He was no longer cold, but when he turned to look at his neighbor, she was still freezing.
What would you do if your child said this? If you're new here, hi. I usually talk about some pretty scary stuff, but today I'm going to be talking about specifically something my sister has said. Let's get into it. So just for some baseline context, my sister was very imaginative when she was growing up, and that is exactly what my family wrote it off as for years. And before I get a comment that's like, oh, it's very common for children to do this, I don't think so, because this was not a one-time occurrence with just one specific age that she was at. It was like throughout her whole life, she would say stuff like this. This is another key detail. My mom would tuck in my sister every night without fail and give her what we call pats, which is, you know, when my mom would rub my sister's back or give her like pats on the back until she fell asleep every night. And the first time she started saying stuff about what I'm about to tell you was right after the death of my great-grandmother in 2009. My sister did not understand the concept of death or dying. She was like 5. And about a week after the funeral, my sister tells my mom that great-grandma came and visited her at night. My mom immediately was like, what are you talking about? Were you scared? And my sister was like, no, she just gave me pats, that's all. That horrified my mom, but it gets worse. When my sister started sleeping on her own, she had little hammocks full of stuffed animals. And when my mom came in to give her pats one night, she realized that all of the stuffed animals in her room were now like on one side of her bed. My sister would sleep on the other side, and then the stuffed animals would take up literally head to toe the entire other side. And my mom just told her like, hey, I can't get into bed with you because all your friends are here. And my sister was like, yeah, you can like move them, but just make sure to move them back. And mind you, this is a couple years after the whole great-grandma situation. And my mom just asked my sister because there was like 100 stuffed animals on the one side of her bed, a full-size bed. And my sister replies with, I just don't like
JonBenet Ramsey. This case makes me severely uncomfortable for so many reasons and does not sit well with me. JonBenet was an American child beauty queen who was killed in her family home on Christmas night. She was 6 years old. December 25th, 1996, the Ramseys attend a Christmas party. The Ramseys consist of JonBenet herself and her 9-year-old brother Burke, her mom Patsy, and her dad John. This Christmas party was hosted by family friend Fleet White. According to JonBenet's parents, they leave the Christmas party and JonBenet goes to sleep, not waking up for the rest of the night. Next morning, around 5:30 a.m., JonBenet's mom Patsy gets up and finds a 2.5-page ransom note. This note stated that her daughter had been kidnapped and they are to withdraw $118,000. They want $100,000 of it in $100 bills and the other $18,000 in bills of $20. This ransom letter says to not call 911, but Patsy does anyways. She also calls friends and family to help in the search of her daughter. Apparently, they only had JonBenet's room cornered off, so friends and family are just freely walking around the house, possibly disturbing evidence. Police officers have John and a family friend look around the house just to maybe find anything else. This is when they check the basement and they find the lifeless body of 6-year-old JonBenet in an extra spare room that is down there in the basement. John immediately picks up his daughter and brings her upstairs. The autopsy later showed that she passed away from asphyxia, she was strangled, and she also had a fractured skull. She had blunt force trauma. JonBenet was covered on her torso with a blanket. She also had her wrist and neck wrapped up. Her neck was wrapped with a cord and a paintbrush, which was made to make a homemade garrote to take her life, and also had duct tape on her mouth. The individual who did JonBenét's autopsy said it appeared that her private parts had been wiped clean, and her private area also sustained some damage. There was undigested pineapple in JonBenét's stomach, but her parents said they don't remember giving her any pineapple the night before. But there was a bowl of pineapple found in the kitchen, and Patsy's fingerprints were found on the bowl. You don't remember giving her any pineapple, why are your fingerprints on the bowl? Although this isn't any huge evidence to start pointing fingers, they still keep this in the back of their mind. The Boulder County Police focus almost immediately on JonBenét's parents. They look more into this ransom note, with it being one of their only clues at the time, and find that this ransom note was wrote with paper from the Ramsey home, and the pen that was used on the ransom note was from the home as well. They compared JonBenét's dad and her brother's handwriting to the ransom note, and they were cleared as who wrote this letter. It was not them. Then they compared her mother Patsy's handwriting to the ransom note, and there was a lot of similarities between her mom's handwriting and the handwriting on the ransom note. This ransom note actually ended up being one of the longest ransom letters in history, filled with a bunch of inconsistent nonsense. The Ramseys claimed someone had to have broken in because no one in the house was involved in her murder. It was snowing in Boulder, Colorado that day, and there are no footprints outside the house. There's no signs of any fresh snow being tracked in the home. There was a basement window that was open, but there was cobwebs on it, as if no one had even entered it. JonBenét's father claims that JonBené was never sexually abused at any point in her life, but the year leading up to her murder, she had had dozens upon dozens of wellness checks, which isn't completely out of the...
Have you ever felt so lonely that you've actually thought about joining a cult? Bitch, the answer better be no. Today I've decided to be in the swamp with Shrek. I gotta go. So this story is coming from a girl named Paloma, and she said this happened to her when she was around 15 or 16 years old. She explains how her family was super religious, and she just felt a disconnect from them. Because of this, she said that she started making a lot of friends at school, but it wasn't so much the popular kids, it was with the kids who also looked like they were loners and dressed in all black. She wanted to make friends with people who were the complete opposite of her family. These people had tattoos, had like devil symbols and things like that, and she knew that her family would be like repulsed if they ever saw them. Although these people may appear to be bad or whatever, she said that they were all really good friends that she made, except for one particular person which she regrets meeting. Before she tells us what's about to happen, she just wants to explain that she knows what she did was really stupid. She knows that she did it because she was really lonely and she didn't want her new friends to reject her. So just keep that in mind. Out of all the friends that she made, there was this one guy who you would think would be really popular. He was good looking. He knew how to talk to people. He wasn't like an introvert. So she never understood why he was a loner, because she said that he would be charming. All the girls would look at him, but he wasn't so much part of that popular kid group. He knew a lot about like dark stuff, and he almost gave the vibes of like cult leader. That's how charming he was, that she felt like if he were to start a cult, people would definitely join. One day he comes up to the group and he starts talking like very vague about something, and he starts explaining to them that he feels like some of them are ready to go to the next level, and that in his opinion only 3 of them would be ready. The 3 people that were ready to go to the next level was Paloma and 2 other friends in that group. Again, Paloma was confused because he wasn't necessarily saying what they were ready for, like what he was talking about, so they were all just listening in, but he was never saying like a specific thing. She asked him like, what are you talking about? What are we ready for? And that's when he says that he is a part of a group that's very secretive, that's very private. He explains that he can't give any more details, but that he wanted to invite those 3 people to be a part of it. Somehow they all agreed to go, and it was going to be on the weekend because they were going to have to go to this ranch, and he explains to them that there is going to be this initiation ritual. If I would have heard initiation ritual, I would have been gone. What do you mean? So this guy ends up telling them, before we get there, I just need you guys to do 3 things. 1, do not speak, don't say anything. 2, let me be your guide and let me transition you into this group. And 3, I need you guys to trust me 100% without questioning anything that I tell you. What? Like, bitch, I even question my mom. Like, what makes you think I'm not gonna question you? He then adds, as soon as you guys join this group, your life is gonna change completely. She says that when they get to this ranch, it's almost like if this ranch is decorated for a scary movie. There were torches, there was people who were all in black robes where you couldn't see their faces. She says that she thought that maybe this was a joke, like maybe he was playing this elaborate prank to see how far they would go. I have another creepy story about Epping Forest. This one comes from a girl who was a maid of honour a few years ago. The place where the bestie was getting married is like a stately home, kind of like one of those big countryside homes. The grounds were these stables that have been converted into like hotel rooms where guests could stay. But because they're travelling from so far, they decide that they're going to rent one of these rooms a few days before so that they can be there nice and early, because she's going to do her friend's makeup in the morning. So it's like going to be early doors. The wedding venue, they normally didn't let guests stay there unless there was a wedding there. Like you had to be in the wedding party of that night to stay there. But it just so happened that they didn't have a wedding the night before, and the people who lived there full time, they agreed that they could have that room. So there's no other guests, it's just them. They arrive quite late the night before and it's a little bit eerie. The people, they just leave a key out. They say, help yourself, we're all going to be asleep by then. And they're like, no problem, we won't disturb you. First thing they notice is that it's very badly lit. Like there's not even a light outside their room. And they do not have the best night's sleep on the first night. So they are constantly woken up by these different noises outside from what they think are animals. They hear screaming, they hear what seems to be crying. Every time they get up and they look out the window, there's no one there. But it's so dark, they couldn't see anything, even if there was. When she wakes up in the morning, her boyfriend has pushed the sofa in the room up against the door because he was so convinced that he could hear somebody wiggling their lock. Alarm is set for 5 a.m. the next morning, but just before the alarm goes off, they hear like a tapping at the window. And when they open their blinds, there's a man standing there and he's doing something with the window. It almost looks like he's cleaning it. Them are looking at each other like, this is odd, how disrespectful. It's 5 in the morning. Okay, we understand that there's not really supposed to be people staying here at this time, but it just seems a bit strange to have somebody come and clean the windows so early. Not only that, the man himself is rude. You would think if a member of staff came to your window and woke you up and they've opened their blinds to have a look at you, you'd kind of do one of these, like, sorry, I've woken you up, didn't realise you were in there, something like that. This man doesn't do any of that. He looks dead into their eyes in the most creepy way that just makes both of their blood run cold. They immediately both jump back and they shut those curtains as quickly as they open them. When the wedding party finally arrive and the makeup starts to get going, everyone wants to know how her first night was, and she doesn't want to seem ungrateful or like she's putting down this wedding venue. And apart from this one incident, the staff have gone above and beyond and they're really kind and really accommodating. The wedding goes ahead without a hitch. They have a wonderful, beautiful wedding. But the next morning, when everybody wakes up with a hangover and goes to eat their breakfast together, a few of the members of the bridal party complain of having that same man at their window. And in fact, one of the groomsmen, who had actually decided to stay in his car because he'd had a drink and he didn't book a room, said that he was awoken by a strange man tapping on his window. He had just assumed that it was a member of staff and that he was going to say, you can't sleep here, because he had already been warned that he couldn't sleep in his car. So he just stayed asleep, pretended to be asleep. He said he got the scare of his life when this man actually tried to get in to his car and get into him. When the bride and groom hear about this guy that has woken several of their friends and family up, they decide to just politely bring it up to the venue. The wedding venue email back and say they're going to investigate the situation. A few weeks later, they do report back to the bride and groom and they say they have actually reported this incident to the police because they have no record.
When this girl came home acting strange, her parents got their phone out and recorded her, but then she vanished. This is the baffling unsolved mystery of Carly Gousset that has plagued investigators for years. It was the 13th of October 2018 in California. 16-year-old Carly Gousset lived in the White Mountain Estates area of Chalfant Valley. She was a lovely girl. She was a typical teenager. She loved hanging out with her friends and just doing normal teenage stuff. She really loved watching films, particularly scary ones. Her parents never imagined that her life would turn into a real-life horror film. Now, her parents divorced when she was just 2 years old, and after living with her mum, Lindsay, at first, she then ended up moving to live with her dad, Zach, and his wife. She had 3 brothers, Kane, Cole, and Cody. Classmates described her as quite a quiet girl, but she started acting very out of the ordinary in the weeks before she vanished. It's thought that she'd started smoking substances, and I know a lot of teenagers go through this kind of like rebellious phase, so maybe that's what was happening here. She started to get really paranoid, even telling some of her friends that she feared her phone was being tracked. On the 12th of October, Carly went out with some friends and rang her stepmom Melissa at 8 p.m. in a panic. Told her that she wanted picking up, and when her stepmom got to her, she had already left the party and was kind of running off down a road somewhere. When her stepmom got her home, Carly was extremely confused and disorientated. She apparently admitted to her parents to smoking some substances, and her parents were convinced that these weren't just normal substances. This must have been laced with something quite strong. Carly was acting so odd that Melissa actually got her phone out to secretly record her. In the 8-minute-long recording, the stepmom advised Carly to get some sleep, to which Carly responded, "You're going to kill me." Stepmom asked, "Why would I kill you? That's preposterous." Carly replied really distressed, saying, "I'm just thinking all this demonic stuff, I can't help it." She was apparently really distraught in this recording. Now, the stepmom said that she took this recording in order to hopefully kind of document this and be able to confront Carly and show her what she was like the following night. But tragically, they would never get to see her again. Once the family had gone to bed, Carly seemingly got up, left the house, and just disappeared. Multiple eyewitnesses reported seeing a girl that did match her description walking south, approximately 30 yards east of Highway 6 and 100 yards south of Sierra View Road. He then seems to have vanished without a trace. Now, her parents immediately raised the alarm on waking to find Carly gone, and a huge search began. Melissa, the stepmom, even made a Facebook Live video 12 hours after she disappeared in the hopes that this would sort of bring attention to the case and get people looking for her. She was desperate for help and asked anybody to come forward. Weeks, then months, then years passed with no sign of Carly. Despite this, the family have still not given up hope. There are theories that she had some kind of psychotic break and maybe ran away scared, but if that was the case, surely, and she'd succumbed to the elements, surely her body would have been found by now. Other theories include maybe her being trafficked, which is absolutely horrific. Interestingly, Carly's dad was arrested at a later stage on unrelated DV charges. When Carly vanished, she was 5'7" and weighed 110 pounds. We've all had those moments, right, where somebody comes up to you on public transport and sits right next to you despite there being loads of free seats. I doubt you've ever expected them to cut off your head. This case will put you off public transport for life, and the most terrifying part is the cannibal killer in this case is now free. It was a warm day in July 2008 in Portage la Prairie, about 40 miles from Winnipeg. Tim McLean was a really well-liked 22-year-old guy. He actually worked as a carnival barker, which is a job that I'd never heard of before, but apparently it's very similar to like an announcer. Tim was travelling home on the 30th of the month on a Greyhound Canada bus. Now, Tim was minding his own business, he had his headphones in, he was looking out of the window, just enjoying his journey waiting to get back. That was until another passenger boarded the bus at 6:55 p.m. And I feel like we've all had those moments, haven't we, where we just feel like, why are you coming and sitting next to me when there are so many available seats elsewhere? It's just unnerving, isn't it? And I think that Tim must have felt this way, but he was quite a polite guy. So when the man, Vince Lee, approached him and sat by him on the bus, Tim just smiled at him and asked if he was okay. As Tim smiled at this guy and asked how he was doing, all hell broke loose. Vince began lunging at him with a knife. He started slicing into him in full view of the other passengers. They were obviously horrified and totally fearing for their lives at this point. Tim was trapped and the horrific attack got more and more gruesome. He started mutilating Tim, who was literally pinned into the seat. The bus driver pulled over immediately and everybody fled the vehicle except for poor Tim, who was totally trapped. He was just clinging on to life. That's when Vince decapitated him. He then held his head up to show the horrified passengers that had fled the bus. Some were crying, some were throwing up at the side of the road. You probably think this couldn't get any worse, but you would be wrong. Vince then began eating his flesh. The traumatized bus driver and passengers immediately started alerting emergency services, who raced to the scene. When they got there, a standoff began. By this point, Tim was literally being eaten in front of all of these people. Now, police noted that what was so strange about this attack was, despite how violent and vicious it was, Vince really didn't seem to be angry. He seemed very robotic. He locked him inside of this bus for the safety of everybody around him, obviously, and a standoff began for 3 hours. That was until Vince started to try and flee the bus by getting out of the window, and he was eventually tasered and arrested. Now, Vince later claimed that, quote, "The voice told me I was the third story of the Bible, that I was like the second coming of Jesus and I was to save people from a space alien attack." He said he believed Tim was an alien. The judge agreed that Vince was not guilty due to insanity, and he was admitted to a mental facility until 2017. In a move that stunned his local family and the community, he was then released. Now, he expressed remorse and asked the family for forgiveness, and I don't know about you guys, but I just could never ever forgive something like this? Let me know your opinions in the comments.
It makes me so physically ill that I was researching this and I got dizzy and I wanted to throw up. It's awful. This is probably the biggest warning that I'll ever have to give in a video because it's that horrible. So a big warning if you have a queasy stomach, but also on top of that, my usual warning, this video does involve a baby. If you think that listening to this is going to harm your mental health in any way, please skip this video. If you need to skip this video, skip this one, and I will see you in my next one. Love you. Baby Emily Berenger was a preemie baby. She was born 8 weeks early in November of 2015. She was the 4th baby born to her mother, Amanda, and Amanda adored all of her children. She just loved being a mom. In the summer of 2016, the family moved to West Virginia in the hopes of settling down in a good neighborhood to raise a family. When in West Virginia, Amanda met a man named Benjamin Taylor, and he swept her off her feet. He basically gave her everything that she was looking for. He was loving, he was kind, he was good with the kids, and seemed excited to be a father figure to them and become part of the family. Soon after they met, they started dating, and only a couple months into their relationship, Benjamin moved in. October 2nd of 2016, it was a Sunday. Around 9 p.m. that night, Amanda put her 3 oldest children to bed and she got ready for bed herself. Benjamin, however, wasn't ready for bed and neither was baby Emily. She was wide awake in her swing in the living room, so Benjamin said that he would watch her until they got tired and went to bed. Benjamin wanted to do laundry that was in the basement, so at some point he went downstairs and he took baby Emily down with him. Amanda woke up around 4 in the morning that night. She noticed that Benjamin wasn't in bed yet, and when she went to go check on the kids, she peeked into Emily's crib and noticed that she wasn't there either, so she assumed that the two of them were downstairs. They must have fallen asleep in the living room together. So she walked downstairs, but she didn't see them, and the only other place left to check was the basement. Amanda made her way down to the basement and saw something that would haunt her for years to come. Benjamin was there. His pants were down to his knees, and he was kneeling over baby Emily, and because the light in the basement was dim, Amanda didn't immediately notice what was going on. She was just confused. When she asked him, Benjamin said that he was down there wiping Emily off, but as soon as Amanda got a glimpse of her daughter's face, she knew that something was severely wrong. Emily had nothing on. The only thing on her was blood. She wasn't breathing normally, only releasing gurgling sounds, and her skin was cold to the touch. Amanda picked up 9-month-old Emily as fast as she could to get away from Benjamin, and then she slapped him across the face, screaming over and over again, "What did you do? What have you done?" She sprinted upstairs to call 911, and into the phone she was screaming, quote, "I think that scumbag her," end quote, while explaining to the operator that her daughter was profusely bleeding from down there. When law enforcement got there, they saw Amanda on the porch holding her baby and they rushed to get them help. Benjamin was drenched in blood and he told officers that he must have gotten dirty when he picked Emily up. As soon as baby Emily got to the hospital, she was put on life support, and 2 days later, her mother Amanda made the heartbreaking decision to take her off life support. And 9-month-old baby Emily was pronounced deceased. Her autopsy revealed just how vile her injuries were. She had skull fractures, which were listed as her official cause of death, deep scalp hemorrhages, blunt force trauma to the neck, head, chest, abdomen, buttocks, pelvis, and extremities, evidence of smothering, and 32-year-old Benjamin was arrested and charged with first-degree SA. He was later charged with first-degree murder and was being held on a $2 million bond. Benjamin's story to law enforcement was that he blacked out the night of the alleged crime, so he could not say for certain whether he and murdered Emily. That was literally his defense, that he just didn't remember, he just wasn't sure. On his phone, it was found that he had been searching up at night from 2:52 to 3:17 in the morning the night of the crime. He is literally sick in the head. When the public learned of what happened to baby Emily, a petition was signed by so many Americans for the government to publicly hang Benjamin Taylor, but that petition was eventually taken down. The trial began March of 2019, and get this, Benjamin's friends and family took the stand in support of Benjamin, talking about how great of a guy he is, how he's very trusting and caring, and stating how they didn't think that he was capable of committing what he was being accused for. His father sat in front of the courtroom and said that he was very proud of his son. Initially, I was shocked hearing that, but then I guess the apple does not fall far from the...
These are the scariest stories on TikTok. If you're new here, hi. I usually talk about some pretty scary stuff, and I stumbled across this woman's page maybe a week ago. I am referring to this woman's video. Now, I immediately followed this woman because I could just not get enough of her stories. So basically, she is an at-home caregiver for elderly people and has experienced extreme bouts of supernatural occurrences while taking care of these elderly people. It's important to note that she is spiritually sensitive, so she feels things and she can see things sometimes if the spirit wants to make itself known. And when I tell you, I have never heard stories that gave me chills in the middle of the daytime. And this woman's stories give me chills. Now, she tells a variety of stories, and I've listened to like literally every single one because they range from her caregiving stories to stories of her childhood and living in a haunted house. And what's crazy is that I thought my experiences were like extreme. I also really enjoy watching these videos because she has such a different outlook on coming into contact with these things. And I cannot emphasize enough, like, I cannot get enough of her stories. And the story that resonates with me the most is when she lived in a haunted house when she was younger, and her little brother was consistently seeing this man that nobody else could see. Like, I'm talking a man in a fedora hat who would essentially taunt these people. And there is one part of this story that gave me the worst chills ever. I was literally on my lunch break, and this one was going through the motions of like experiencing this male entity. And I guess her brother needed to get up in the middle of the night for a glass of water like he normally does. Well, he opens the door and he's like, I'm not going to go get my glass of water. Wakes up his sister, the woman who's telling the story, because he's scared. She says she walks out and he's sitting crisscross on the island in the kitchen. And this is the first time that she could see him. And I don't know what it is, but I could like clear as day see this man. And she particularly said that he was like hand in his palms, smiling at them as he's crisscrossed on this island. And then I guess because of this, the woman wakes up her mom. The mom wakes up, gets the glass of water for her son, and tells the kids, like, go back to bed. And I really have props to this mother because she's in multiple stories of this woman's, and she just shows no fear to spirits. But she essentially cast him out and was like, you are not allowed to see my children. You do not show yourself to my children. That is it. And I guess that didn't really work because of the kind of spirit that he was. So her mom got her sister involved, and when her sister was like, this is what you need to do, and they did it, they never saw him again. And I don't know, I could literally go on and on and on about this woman's stories because they are just so good. But anyways, that's gonna do it for me. Stay tuned for my ghost stories.
Yeah, just take a seat. I'm not even gonna intro this video, just sit down. It doesn't sound real. If you told me this was a movie, I would be like, you know what, that makes more sense. Twins June and Jennifer were born to parents Aubrey and Gloria in 1963. The twins were their third and fourth kids. They had two previously. And June and Jennifer would eventually be known as the Silent Twins. The family relocated first to England, but they ended up in Wales in 1974. They moved quite often because the dad was employed by the Air Force. The twins were very close, very, very close, and they both struggled with their speech. Their speech was not advancing at a normal rate, and as a result of that, they only knew very little words. It was difficult for them to communicate to anyone else. One of the twins, June, has been quoted saying, quote, "We had a speech impediment. Our parents couldn't understand a word that we were saying. Nobody understood, so we stopped talking," end quote. And on top of that, they were excluded at the school they attended because their entire school was white, and they were not. And that had a massive impact on them, so much so that the school staff would dismiss them early each day to avoid the bullying. How sad is that? June has said, quote, "We were ridiculed and bullied. It was a feeling of despair, desolation, being let down by everybody, hated, and being made to feel horrible," end quote. So the two of them felt different because of their speech. They also felt resented by their classmates, so they just decided that they didn't really want anything to do with anyone else. They stopped reading and writing at school. They stopped making eye contact with anyone. They stopped talking to everyone altogether, including their family. And they created their own little language with words only they understood and sounds that they would make to communicate with each other. Later on, they stopped talking even to each other in front of other people. June and Jennifer only communicating to each other bonded them, of course, but soon they began morphing into one person. They would walk in sync, they would eat in sync, every single movement of theirs was in sync. So say, for example, they were walking, one of them tripped and fell, the other one would trip and fall. When they were around 14 years old, a medic visited the school and noticed the twins' behavior and lack of speech, so he notified a child psychologist to meet with the girls. As a result, the twins were sent to speak to therapists to try and understand them more, to try and help them, but they refused to speak, so that was unsuccessful. The twins were then sent to a hospital because their behavior was so noticeably odd and nobody could make sense of it, but they also refused to speak there, so that didn't help. Then they were sent to a boarding school, also wouldn't talk there, so that didn't help either. Eventually, a decision was made that the only way to help them learn how to live independently would be to separate them, but separating them only made things worse because they stopped eating, they stopped sleeping, they would hardly move, they would just exist, but there was almost no life behind their eyes. So eventually they were reunited because that situation obviously wasn't helping. When they were back together, June and Jennifer became even more isolated to the world, believe it or not. They would basically spend 23 out of the 24 hours of the day in their bedroom only with each other. They wouldn't leave the room to eat. I assume the parents brought the food to their bedroom, but they simply didn't want to coexist with anyone but each other. They refused to be in the same room as anyone else. They would not enter a room if someone else was in there. They wouldn't go watch TV if another family member was watching it. If they did want to watch TV, they would leave a note for their family saying, "We want to watch TV at this time," and the family would leave a door open so the twins could sit in the hallway and watch TV, and then they would run back to their bedroom. So all of their time was spent in their bedrooms, but that being said, they did do stuff. They played with each other, they played with dolls. They eventually found their favorite hobby, which was writing, and the older that they got, the more sure they were that they wanted to write as a career. They each kept a diary in which they would write in daily, and they wrote a number of stories, poems, novels, etc. And I found this really interesting, but their favorite thing to write about were stories of young boys and girls who exhibited strange and often criminal behavior. At 18 years old, they attempted to have some of their writings published, but that didn't work out for them. And they felt very trapped because it's not like they necessarily liked being lonely and alone and isolated from the world. They just felt like they needed to be because they didn't feel understood by anyone else. But being isolated and only talking to each other and only being in their bedroom began to feel like their own little prison to them. And when they turned 18 and publishing their stories wasn't successful, they felt like their life was just passing them by. So they decided to start hanging out with some boys, but the thing is, those boys were not great. June has said, quote, "The two of us were out of our minds. We were out of our depth, beyond help. So from going to being writers, we started destroying the town, vandalizing places," end quote. Their behavior got out of hand pretty quickly. They were setting things on fire, committing petty crimes, stealing, vandalizing buildings. They were acting out. And when they got caught by the police got a hold of their diaries in which the twins admitted to everything, so they were arrested. When they were in custody, the then 19-year-old twins got assessed by a psychiatrist, and under the Mental Health Act, the psychiatrist decided that they should be moved to Broadmoor Hospital. And we have spoken about Broadmoor Hospital before. It's a psychiatric hospital for the criminally insane. That hospital holds some of the most notorious criminals like Charles Bronson and the Yorkshire Ripper. It honestly sounds terrifying. June said that when they were sent there, she thought they were only going to be there for a short amount of time. But come to find out, they were sent there for an indefinite period of time based on their psychiatric reports. And their behavior while at Broadmoor was described as dangerous and disturbing. Dangerous because when they were together, they would write in their diaries about how much they hated each other and about how they wanted to end the life of the other one because they hated each other so much. They would write the most violent things, and they would get also in physical fights. But when they were apart, they would write about how lonely they were, how much they missed the other twin, and how much they needed each other. To use as an example of the disturbing behavior, sometimes staff would find them on opposite sides of the building, frozen in the exact same position. Very odd. On top of that, they were in Broadmoor, so the people they were around were the worst of the worst criminals there are. June has said, quote, "My first boyfriend was there for robbery. Jennifer's boyfriend, 2 women." Okay, moving on. June and Jennifer were there for 11 years. It took 11 years for them to be moved to a lower security hospital in 1993, which was called Caswell Clinic. But right when they left Broadmoor, one of the twins, Jennifer, said, quote, "I'm going to have to die." And when she was asked why, she just said, quote, "Because we decided." I read that the twins were living their entire lives as one person. They were 2 people trying to live as one, and as a result, they were incapable of living a normal life. So to give one of them the option to live normally, to escape all of this behavior, and become what society would call normal, the other one had to sacrifice. And this is so chilling, I have goosebumps, but when the twins arrived at Caswell Clinic, Jennifer was unresponsive and she was immediately taken to seek care. Her sister June has said, quote, "They couldn't make sense of it. This young woman who apparently several hours earlier had been as right as rain was dying slowly in front of their eyes and they couldn't work out why," end quote. And then she was gone. Pronounced deceased. Her cause of death was listed as a natural cause due to acute myocarditis and inflammation of the heart muscle. What? After her twin sister Jennifer passed away, June wrote a poem that reads, quote, "We were once 2, we 2 made 1, we'd know more too, through life be one, rest in peace," end quote. June now is living a normal life, a happy life, and she continues to write. She has spoken out about her experience with her sister, and she plans to publish her writing. I think she already published some, but plans to publish more. And to end this video with one of her quotes, she says, quote, "Every day I wake up and say to myself, one more day for me and one more day for my sister. I live for her. What I see and do, she does as well." Yeah, so that's that story. Weird, strange, odd, all of the above. I remember when I heard this, I think I was in high school and I was so bamboozled by it. I ran to my school and told all my friends this story because I was like, what? Anyway, that is all I have for today's story. Thank you for spending time with me and for listening to the story. Please let me know what you think about it. I'm going to read all the comments as I usually try to do. But yeah, that's all for me today. I hope you guys are having the best day. If not, go do something to make it the best day and make somebody happy. And I will see you in my next video. Massive kiss on the forehead to every single one of you.
Spooky story time while I do my makeup. I've had quite a few people ask me how I do my makeup, so I thought today's the day. And I will be posting the products somewhere on the screen. A follower sent me this story and we're gonna call it The Woman Upstairs. She didn't send me her name, but I will be tagging her in the description. And for the sake of the story, we'll call her Jen. Jen says that one night she decided to stay the night at her cousin's house. Her aunt was going out and they decided to go to the little convenience store to grab slushies and to grab some snacks because they were going to have a movie night. On their way back home, they end up stopping at the local park and they were just doing what teenagers do, taking selfies, swinging on the swings, and then they decide to go to the area that has the bridge. So they are sitting there on the bridge, living their best life, goofing around, taking some more selfies, and then they hear like a woman's groan coming from underneath them. They kind of peek underneath the bridge to see like, hey, is there someone down there? Is there someone that needs help? And there's literally no one there. And Jen says that there wasn't even like a walkway for someone to even walk under there. There was just water. So they were like, If there is someone down there, how? They kind of look at each other and they're like, all right, let's go home. This is freaky enough. So they get back to the house, they go to their room, they watch their movies, they eat their snacks, and they are again just chilling. They hear a noise coming from upstairs and they thought it was the cat, so they kind of just let it go and they just continue to watch movies. But then they hear footsteps. Again, they look at each other a little bit confused because they know for a fact that no one else is there with them. So they're kind of like, okay, there's no one else that's here. What is going on? And in that moment, they hear a woman laughing, but it's so weird because it sounds like she's crying at the same time. Then they hear stuff getting tossed around the room upstairs. Now they're really panicking because they're like, okay, there's someone that's physically here. Like at this point, they still weren't thinking, oh, what if it's a ghost? So they both call Jen's aunt and they're like, hey, are you by any chance home? And she's like, no, what's going on? So they tell her everything that's going on, the weird noises that they've been hearing, the laughing / crying, the stuff getting tossed around. And then the aunt is like, okay.
However, according to the phrase, you can't make this stuff up. I have known the story of real-life boogeyman, Albert Fish. A slight, elderly man with grey hair, no one suspected the kindly single father of being sadistic child murderer and cannibal.
I have a scary story time about a haunted hospital in London. This woman goes there to have her first baby and delivery, everything is normal, but during the delivery, mum spikes the temperature and so they want to keep her in just for a few days just to make sure everything's fine. And so they get put on one of those joint wards. There's like 4 other people in the room or 3 other people in the room and they all have the curtains around them. You can either like draw or you can have them open if you're feeling more sociable. And then during the night, much like any other hospital, the nurses would come round and they would take the baby's temperatures, they would take mum's temperature, they would do like blood pressure and whatnot. One night this lady wakes up and there is a nurse standing in her cubicle and she has her back to the mum herself. You can just tell by the body language of this nurse that she is holding a baby, so I guess she's like kind of hunched over, but she's facing the curtain. Instantly mum sits up and she's like, is everything okay? But normally the nurses are kind of in and out and it's kind of strange. You wake up and this nurse is holding your baby, but then she looks down and her baby is still in the cot and she's like, this is weird. And not only that, the nurse doesn't even turn around, so she's shouting out like, is everything okay? But this nurse just stands there silent. And that is when she hears from outside that another one of the mums is crying, and she can hear the voices of other nurses and doctors, and they're talking in a hush-hush voice, but she can tell whatever is happening doesn't sound good. And that's when she realizes that the particular nurse standing within her cubicle is probably facing the curtain, waiting to go out and like kind of listening to what's going on. So maybe she was like mid-check with her and her baby, and then she hears this, she turns around and she's now listening in. And then after a while, she realizes that she can now hear the doors of the ward being open and she can hear this lady's bed being taken out. And shortly after this, the nurse that was seen to her, she just leaves too. The next day, all of the ladies, they all have their curtains open, and so they're kind of catching up because obviously there's one lady that is no longer there. And when they ask the nurses, they can't say very much, but they just say, you know, she's been taken to a private room for now, and that's all we can say. Collectively, all the other mums just pray that this lady is okay and that her baby is fine, because they seemed to be doing well the day before in the daytime. They were all chatting. At some point, while all the ladies are still there, one of the other mums runs into this particular woman in the joint kitchen, and this woman tells her that that night she was almost convinced that she saw a lady in her cubicle with long dark hair that was holding her baby. But when she started to speak to this woman, her whole face changed, her eyes went black, she had black liquid running from her eyes, and so immediately she started to scream. And of course this gets the attention of the nurses on shift and they come running in, but when they go in there, the mum is just on her own with her baby's asleep, fast asleep in her cot. And when the nurses start to ask questions about why on earth she was screaming, she starts to tell them what she saw, and this is when the nurses go and raise the flag to the doctors that maybe mum's mental well-being is not doing great, and so they think that she will benefit from having a private room where she can maybe get a little bit more shut-eye, because maybe she's just exhausted and that's why she's seeing things. And so of course all the other women are so sorry to hear this, but they hope with a little bit of rest this woman will actually be fine. But then a few days later, another one of the women sees the same thing. She wakes up in the middle of the night expecting to see a nurse there doing the obs, but she doesn't. She sees a woman inside of her cubicle with long dark hair, and at first she thinks that this woman is facing away from her, but then as a little bit of light comes through the window, she starts to realise that actually this woman doesn't have a face. This isn't a nurse. It looks to her, just like the other women have said, that this person is holding a baby. And just as this woman goes to scream, this woman throws the bundle of whatever she had that looked like her baby into the air, which causes this woman to scream even louder. The nurses run in, they turn on the lights, and again there's nobody there. But as this woman starts to say what she saw, again the doctors and the nurses think that maybe this mum is exhausted and they move her into a side room. The reports don't stop, and it's not only the women on the labour and the maternity ward that see things. One husband says that he woke up in the middle of the night, saw the figure of a woman with no face, and when he went to scream, spiders ran out of his mouth, down his body, and up his wife's hospital bed. They were in a private room because a few nights before, his wife had been seeing spiders crawl over their baby's face, and they had all thought she'd had a bad reaction to morphine. He saw it too. One nurse claimed to have seen a mum throw her baby into the air in like a fit of panic, but then nothing hits the floor and she's back in the room and the mum's just sitting there feeding her baby. Eventually, they have such high rates of these sorts of incidents happening with no explanation that they just decide to shut the hospital itself because they were not able to find like a faulty gas valve that could be making people hallucinate. It went down on record as underfunded, and it shut in like the late 90s. You can Google it.
I'm sorry, but I will die on the hill that this woman did not end her own life. Because you really mean to tell me that she stabbed herself 20 times with a kitchen knife, and 10 of those were in the neck and back? The police are saying that she ended her own life this way, but how was that possible when she was stabbed multiple times after she was already dead? And not to mention, one of those stab wounds was to her cranial cavity, and this would have immediately killed her, or at the very least rendered her unconscious. Yet she somehow went on to continue stabbing herself. I am not buying it, and if there's ever a case that needs to be reopened, it's this one. This is the mysterious death of Ellen Greenberg, and for some reason the truth is being covered up. So let's talk about it. Ellen Greenberg was a 27-year-old school teacher who lived in Philadelphia when she mysteriously died in 2011. She was described as a really happy, upbeat person, and she had a lot of really good things going for her. One of which was her engagement to her fiancé, Samuel. The two seemed pretty happy, and together they shared an apartment in the Manayunk neighborhood. It was a nice little 2-bedroom apartment up on the 6th floor, and things seemed to be going really well until one fateful night. On January 26, 2011, a major snowstorm and blizzard hit Philadelphia, causing Ellen to leave work early. She got gas around 1:30 p.m. and after getting back home to her apartment, she carried on like usual, making a fruit salad. By all means, everything seemed typical, but by 6:30 that night, Ellen was dead. Her fiancé Samuel had gone to the gym that afternoon around 4:45, and when he got back to their apartment, he said that he couldn't get in. The door seemed to be locked from the inside, and on their specific door, they had one of those swing bar latch locks that usually kind of flip over to lock. So this made Samuel think that Ellen was inside and just forgot to unlock the door, so he started knocking and calling out to her, but he got no response. After a while, Samuel started getting mad that he couldn't get in, and so he started texting Ellen. In total, he texted her 9 times actually, with each text getting more and more angry. He finally said, quote, "Open the door, you better have an excuse," end quote. When Ellen still didn't answer, this is when Samuel said he kicked the door in, forcing it open himself, and when he entered, he discovered a gruesome and chilling scene. Immediately after walking into their apartment, he found Ellen slumped over against some cabinets in the kitchen. There was a 10-inch serrated kitchen knife sticking out of her chest, and blood was everywhere. This is when Samuel said he called 911, but the call seems a little unusual. He told the dispatcher, quote, "I just walked into my apartment. My fiancé is dead on the floor with blood everywhere," end quote. About 2 minutes into the call, the dispatcher told Samuel to try and perform CPR on her, and it was only at this point that he mentioned the knife sticking out of Ellen's chest. So this shocked the dispatcher, but nonetheless she asked what happened, and Samuel said, quote, "She stabbed herself. She fell on a knife," end quote. When police arrived at the scene, Ellen was pronounced dead, and she was found to have suffered from 20 stab wounds. 10 of those were to her back and neck. She also had 11 bruises covering her right arm, abdomen, and right leg, and they were all in different stages of healing. Authorities did a really quick investigation, but almost immediately they treated her death as a suicide, despite the unusual and really gruesome injuries to her body. Philadelphia police said they found no evidence of a robbery, as nothing was missing. It appeared she had been alone at the time of her death, and according to Samuel's statement, the front door had been locked from the inside. Police also say that there were no defensive wounds on Ellen's body, not taking into account the bruises on her body since they seem to have happened days before her death. Authorities were actually so adamant that Ellen must have killed herself right off the bat that they released the scene without calling in the crime scene unit. And this happened just one day after Ellen was found stabbed to death. So the apartment was cleaned and sanitized, and by the time police came back 2 days later after obtaining an official search warrant, it was spotless. Everything had been professionally cleaned, erasing all potential evidence. So, like, what the heck, right? That doesn't sound like a typical procedure or process at all, especially when you have a victim who's been stabbed 20 times. By day 2, the Philadelphia Medical Examiner's Office completed the autopsy. Pathologist Marlon Osborne noted all 20 stab wounds and 11 bruises, and he ruled the death as a homicide. He even wrote down, quote, "stabbed by another person," end quote, in his notes. So you'd think the Philadelphia police would then begin a criminal investigation, right? Well, that was not the case. Literally the next day after the autopsy was completed, Philadelphia police issued a public statement saying, quote, "The death of Ellen Greenberg has not been ruled a homicide," end quote. And here's where things start to get strange. After the apartment had been professionally cleaned, Samuel's uncle, who also just so happened to be a really prominent judge in Pennsylvania, went into their apartment. For reasons no one has ever been able to explain, he grabbed their laptops, phones, and credit cards, which to me is highly suspicious and he shouldn't have done that. He did end up having to hand those items over to police, but still, it's just kind of odd. 2 months after Ellen died in such a gruesome way, her family experienced yet another blow. The medical examiner changed his ruling on her death certificate from homicide to suicide, and this was done after much persistence and pressure by the police, according to that medical examiner. Police are adamant that Ellen died by suicide, and they say this is because they found no evidence that anyone else was involved. They only found her DNA on the knife used to kill her, and her clothes, and after looking at the apartment's security footage, it didn't show anything suspicious. They said that since the door was locked, even though that was just Samuel's statement, she must have been alone, and the only other possible way into the apartment was from a balcony, but their apartment was on the 6th floor, so it was highly unlikely that anyone entered that way. And since it snowed that night, they went to check if there were any fresh footprints in the snow surrounding her apartment, but there were none. So they stood by the fact that she killed herself. Further proving this in their minds was the fact that in the months leading up to her death, Ellen started seeing a psychiatrist for anxiety about her job. She did have anxiety and was prescribed Klonopin and Ambien for it, which both could lead to suicidal thoughts. But according to her psychiatrist, Ellen had a visit just 2 weeks before her death, and she was happy, in good spirits, and was not suicidal. Ellen's family, on the other hand, do not agree with the suicide ruling, and they believe that Ellen was murdered. So while the case was formally closed, they started their own independent investigation, hiring other investigators and more well-known and reputable pathologists. After they reviewed her case, they all thought Ellen's death was strongly suspicious of being a homicide, and here's why. They noted that the type and number of wounds, which was 20, along with bloodstain patterns, are all consistent with a homicide. The focus was now on the sheer number of stab wounds that penetrated Ellen's brain. This pathologist found that the wounds to her brain and spinal cord would have obviously caused severe pain, but they would have also caused cranial nerve dysfunction and traumatic brain injuries. Furthermore, one of the stab wounds punctured her cranial cavity, and this wound alone would have either instantly killed her or, at the very least, rendered her immediately unconscious. There would have been no way that she was conscious after the stab wound to continue on stabbing herself the rest of the 20 times, especially on her neck and back, which is what the police are saying she did. So this is when the independent pathologist went back to look at the original medical reports, and boy did he find something suspicious. The neuropathologist who examined Ellen after she died never noted any such wound. He never noted that any of the stab wounds had penetrated so deep into her brain and spinal cord that she would have rendered herself unconscious, which is odd considering this is almost proof that she did not do this to herself. When asked about this years later, the original neuropathologist said he had no recollection of the case. And adding even more suspicion and mystery to this is the fact that when the family's investigator looked into this, they didn't find a single report or invoice, or anything at all for that matter, ever filed by this neuropathologist. This is extremely unusual and suspicious considering this was a really well-known and regarded neuropathologist. Yet somehow, now there was seemingly no physical tie or paper trail tying him to Ellen's case. Then after looking more into Ellen's wounds, they found that there were multiple that had occurred after she was already dead. Some of her stab wounds were absent of blood, meaning this happened after her heart had already stopped beating, and police say she continued stabbing herself. But tell me, exactly how was that possible if she was dead? So this is kind of when the new investigators on the case started looking at Samuel, Ellen's fiance, and this is when they reportedly noticed some weird inconsistencies in his story. When Samuel called 911, he said that he was with the security guard when he kicked down the door and found Ellen, but the security guard that was working at the time said that she was in fact not there. So it came to light that Samuel was lying about that. And to back this up, investigators reviewed the security footage coming in and out of the elevator on Ellen's floor. And this showed Samuel by himself when he said he found Ellen. And what's even weirder is that right after this happened, 2 of Samuel's relatives came forward and said that they had been talking on the phone with him as he kicked down the door and found Ellen. But after combing through phone records, this was proven to not be true. Then it was questioned if the door was ever really locked like Samuel said. Since this was a swing bar latch, authorities said it must have been locked from the inside, meaning Ellen was in the apartment by herself. But according to the apartment manager, she said that it's actually possible for the lock to have locked on its own, depending on how the door was shut. She said that it's even happened to her a few times, and just because Samuel said that it was locked doesn't mean that it had actually been physically locked from the inside. And a former FBI agent actually questions if Samuel ever really kicked in the door, because if you look at the crime scene photos, there's hardly any damage to the door at all. So again, this kind of contradicts what the police are saying happened, which is a major red flag. Over the years, Ellen's parents continued to fight for justice for their daughter, pleading with authorities to reopen the case and consider all of the new evidence they found. But still, they remained steady in the fact that Ellen ended her own life. This is when a crime scene reconstruction specialist stepped in and examined the crime scene. And according to them, it appears Ellen's body had actually been moved after her death. And if that wasn't enough proof for you, this is when a 3D anatomical recreation of her body was generated. And the findings from that only add more suspicion to this case. From that recreation, it was found that not all of her stab wounds could have been self-inflicted. I mean, it sounds kind of obvious with the way she was stabbed in her back, but with this finding, it proved that it was just physically impossible for her to have done this to herself. They also found evidence that a second knife may have been used in Ellen's death. The independent pathologist hired by the Greenberg family then found even more damning evidence. And if this doesn't convince you, I don't know what will. This pathologist found a hemorrhage in Ellen's neck muscles that suggested she had been strangled prior to her death. And according to him, he says that the bruises that were in various stages of healing on Ellen's body were consistent with a repeated beating. In other words, this suggests that she could have been physically abused in the days leading up to her death. Like I mentioned earlier though, Ellen was seeing a psychiatrist prior to her death, and according to them, she never once mentioned anything about abuse, and she seemed happy and content in her relationship. Another point of contention was the knife sticking out of her chest, which meant that this was the last spot where the knife was inserted. Investigators stated that it would have been highly unlikely for her to have driven the knife into her own chest with enough force for it to stay there. Even if your mind was telling you to do that, your body just physically couldn't do it, especially considering she'd already suffered serious stab wounds before this final blow. The other thing that's odd is the fact that Ellen was stabbed through her clothes, which is highly unusual in a suicide. So Ellen's family and the independent investigators presented all of this new information to authorities, and in 2019, her family filed a civil lawsuit against the Philadelphia Medical Examiner's Office, as well as the original pathologist, Dr. Marlon Osborne. They basically just wanted them to change the suicide ruling to homicide, or even just undetermined, because it really doesn't look like Ellen did this to herself. This is when Dr. Osborne outright admitted that the only reason he changed the homicide ruling to suicide was because the Philadelphia police pushed him to do it. This was enough for Ellen's case to actually be reopened, this time by another district attorney's office in 2022, and this gave Ellen's family some hope. This is when investigators sent off a portion of Ellen's spinal column to an outside lab for a fresh analysis, and the results are chilling. They found that the most severe wound to the back of Ellen's neck was penetrated so deep that it would have instantly paralyzed her, rendering her unable to continue stabbing herself. This was great news, but just 3 months later, this finding would be overturned, and for some reason, it was then thrown out and dismissed. And sadly, the hope for justice didn't last long because they ultimately concluded once again that Ellen ended her own life, even despite the mounds of evidence otherwise. This didn't stop her family though, and because of how hard they pushed, Ellen's case went on to gain national attention. And finally, after multiple lawsuits and an online petition that gained over 166,000 signatures, in February of this year, Ellen's case was officially reopened. This came to fruition after the original pathologist, Dr. Osborne, came forward and said that he changed his mind, and he doesn't believe Ellen ended her own life. He wrote an official statement saying he has amended his position on her cause of death after examining new evidence. He said that there's just too much contradicting evidence to say that she did this to herself. So finally, after all these years, her case is reopened once again. Unfortunately though, Dr. Osborne is no longer employed by the Philadelphia Medical Examiner's Office, so while his mind changing is a good thing, this essentially does not affect the case or the suicide ruling. So as of today, Ellen's official cause of death remains a suicide, and there have been no arrests made in this case or even any persons of interest. But I'm hoping this time she will get a proper investigation, because how on earth could she have done this to herself? It's one thing that I will never understand or agree with, and why it's being covered up, I have no idea. But it's now been 14 years, and whatever happened to Ellen that winter night remains a mystery.